Insider for the IndyStar and IndyStar.com. It's Tuesday night, and it's one of the biggest nights in the annual NBA calendar. That's the NBA Draft Lottery, where we find out who's got the top pick, who's the top 14 picks, how will fates of franchises be shifted and changed throughout the course of the future. So the Pacers were not in the draft lottery. Let me make that very clear. They were not in it. They were in the playoffs, so only the 14 teams represented who were not in the playoffs get the top 14 picks. Now, you can make trades in the future. Thus, the Boston Celtics getting the number one pick because they made that trade back in 2013 to acquire the Brooklyn Nets pick for the likes and the corpses, most likely, of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce. I think even the Jet was in that trade as well, to try to solidify the Nets, run to the title. They got nowhere close. LeBron has been to 6 straight NBA Finals. But the Pacers were not in the draft lottery, yet a part of their fate and the future of the franchise was really determined tonight, because we get an idea, what teams are going to be doing between now and the draft, which is on June 22nd, which will obviously conclude after the NBA Finals. So the Pacers, look, they're a 42-40 team. They have Paul George, who I think is one of the 10 best players in the NBA. At the same time, is there a suitable solution or a clear path for them to get better? Well, one of the ways is to rebuild, something that Larry Bird, who just stepped down a little bit ago as Pacers team president, has been unwilling to do. With a new voice, a new leader, Kevin Pritchard, who I interviewed Friday at the NBA Draft Combine, you can read that on IndyStar.com. Look, there's a possibility, because of new leadership, a new vision, perhaps even a new identity, that Paul George, who only has 1 year left on his contract, could be traded, could be seen as someone who could be moved to have a quick start or a more progressive move into a rebuild around Miles Turner and whatever you get back, or whoever is one of these top draft picks in June's draft. So the Pacers, not in the draft lottery, yet they are going to have a lot of things to consider moving forward, just because Danny Ainge, the man who tried to call Larry Bird and attempted to make some move to trade for Paul George in February, they now have the number one pick because the Brooklyn Nets were so awful last season at 20-62. They had the biggest chance to win the number one pick. I should also mention that as well. They had about a 25% chance to win the lottery. Usually, the team in the top 3 slots, whether you're have a 20% chance, maybe even an 18% chance, you can get the lottery, or the number one pick, I should say, more times than not. So it's an interesting concept, because if you have the number one pick, like the Celtics, hey, you could get perhaps the best prospect for your franchise moving forward, and you can keep them in a longer term standpoint with less money attached to them based from a contract standpoint. At the same time, the Celtics look to be as close as anyone is right now to competing with LeBron James, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so these things all go into say what Danny Ainge wants to do moving forward between now and the draft. So if you're Danny Ainge, you could call Kevin Pritchard, the new Pacers team president, and say, look, we called you in February. We tried to convince you what we could offer to acquire Paul George. And look, the Celtics, for all their success so far, they don't have that many star players. They have Isaiah Thomas, they have a nice piece in Al Horford, and a lot of other roles, guys who play role players, or guys who are coming off the bench and doing specific things but aren't asked to score 20 points a night. So Paul George could clearly fit there. I think Brad Stevens, a coach many people in Indiana know can do a great job no matter what roster he has, whether he's in the NCAA tournament with Butler or with the Celtics. This team has surprised me in a lot of ways. So if you're the Celtics, for instance, do you throw the number one pick for Paul George? Here's the pro to that if you're the Celtics. Paul George is proven, established, only going to get better. And look, he's not even 30 yet. And he had, historically, or statistically I should say, his best season in the NBA in his 7th season. So he continues to get on this climb of improving, being a two-way player, being a good defender. That is a situation where I really can't see the Pacers really considering, look, if Paul is not committed towards the future, and he hasn't said such since the trade rumors sort of bubbled up before the deadline in February, then it's a possible, scenario for both sides. But the Celtics, who have played the long play since getting these Brooklyn Nets pick, could also say, let's get Markelle Fultz from Washington. Let's see what we could do with him. Let's see if we can get another piece in free agency, a la Gordon Hayward, who may leave the Utah Jazz this offseason now that the Jazz were swept out of the playoffs by the Golden State Warriors. And look, the Pacers were swept in the first round by the Cleveland Cavaliers. If you're the Pacers, do you want to play out another year with Paul George with just 1 year left on his contract? That is the biggest question that Kevin Pritchard is going to have to decide between now and probably the draft, when teams are going to aggressively try to pursue Paul George. At any point that I've talked to both Larry Bird and Kevin Pritchard this season, and even up until last week at the draft combine, both men have said that we believe in Paul George. We believe we can win a championship with Paul George. We believe we can get back to the Eastern Conference Finals and compete against LeBron James, who doesn't seem to be slowing down at any point. They really believe that Paul George is the best option for them. But can they convince Paul George to stay? That's the question, and no one really has an answer just yet. I know Paul had his appearance on Jimmy Kimmel Live yesterday, Monday night. Said a lot of things about Magic, that he is friends. He is going to work out with Kobe Bryant. He, of course, loves the Lakers and Kobe Bryant lore. And look, he could be the next guy if he is in if he's in a Laker uniform. But the Lakers got the number 2 pick in the draft, and it seems like now, based on if you go over Twitter or whatever the analysis will be from others, that Lonzo Ball, the UCLA point guard, who is very much a carbon copy of Jason Kidd, who can actually shoot the ball better than Jason Kidd coming out of college, he seems to be set with his father, of course we all know him, LeVar Ball, to want to play for the Lakers. That is their dream scenario. And would the Lakers and Magic Johnson want to not pick LeVar and instead trade for Paul George and get another established player, when it looks like the Lakers are far more behind in their rebuilding process than, say, the Celtics are when they've already gotten to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they look like they need that one or extra 2 players to sort of get over the hump, or at least to really push LeBron James. I know there's some fans that are watching right now on Facebook Live, and I know Tyler has asked, do you think it matters, or is it the breaking point that if George makes the 3rd-team All-NBA? Now, this is the next domino. Tonight was the first domino in the Pacers' essential offseason. The NBA draft lottery, the idea that at least you know what teams' picks are if you are going to consider trading Paul George. Next is, can Paul be an All-NBA player? Now, there are only 100 people in the media, I am one of them included, who got to vote for such an award. And look, it stipulates on the designated player exception the amount of years you have, versus if you are a top 15 player based on media voting, you can get the Supermax contract, which is 7 years. And for Paul, in this case with the Pacers, he could make upwards to $70 to $75 more million. It's pretty staggering. It's unprecedented. It's never happened in league history before, and this is a new thing because the players and the owners agreed to it in their new collective bargaining agreement, before this season ended. So it's going to go into effect in next calendar NBA season, which starts in July with free agency. I think it is kind of a breaking point whether Paul makes All-NBA or not, because based on what I've been told, and every time I've talked to Paul or his representatives or his agent, the idea is if he is eligible to get the Supermax contract because he is an All-NBA player, he's named to it on Thursday, they want every penny, every single penny of that $200 or so million contract with 7 years included, because then you are truly distinguished as a superstar talent, and now you have the contract to back it up. Now, the other situation is if he doesn't make an All-NBA team, which could very well happen. I think the odds are more in that favor, just because I think in talking to voters at the Combine, talking to voters who are my friends in this industry who also had a vote, I think they valued what Jimmy Butler did well, what Draymond Green did, and even some Gordon Hayward fans are out there too who could have voted for Paul for that 3rd-team All-NBA. So there's really a tense moment that's going to happen Thursday. The league sort of announced yesterday that they're going to release the All-NBA teams, and the way I voted, just for people who may not have read it on the IndyStar, is obviously it's based on position. So Paul has to be one of the top 6 forwards that you select in the voting process, based on 2 guards, 2 forwards, and 1 center for each of the 3 teams. What I ended up doing is LeBron James and Kevin Durant on one team, Giannis Antetokounmpo, who was an amazing player from Milwaukee, I voted him 2nd, and then it gets down to Jimmy Butler. There's this idea that Kawhi Leonard is my MVP, so he's up there as well. And it was really close between me, at least for me. I did not consider Draymond Green. I know some people would say either the third or the fourth best player on this team. Look, the Warriors are great. They have Steph Curry and and Kevin Durant. They're great. But for me, it came down to who did I think was a better player? Who do I think is a top 15 player in this league? And look, the Pacers getting into the playoffs and the fact that Paul dragged them for the better part of the season kind of convinced me. And look, I've watched him for all 82 games. What my argument was in IndyStar, I said, hell, if I don't vote for Paul George on the All-NBA team, no one should, because I've seen Paul George most of the season. So I voted him over Gordon Hayward. It was a tough decision, but that's what I decided. And look, Gordon Hayward is in the same scenario, Pacer fans. Like, the dream scenario for Pacer fans is that Paul is named to the All-NBA on the third team. Gordon Hayward is left off, and now maybe Gordon Hayward is more willing to leave Utah and maybe come to a contender, either Boston or Indiana, where he is from. So that's a scenario to sort of look for Thursday when that news is announced. I know Gavin is asking, will teams be able to start to make trades this offseason? Look, it can start as soon as tomorrow because you now know what the draft order is because of tonight's lottery. I will say a dark horse in all of this is the Philadelphia 76ers. They tried to trade for Paul George. They didn't have much to offer at the time in February just because obviously we know the team is in a rebuild. They're trying to trust the process even though Sam Hinkie is no longer there. But look, they got picks and they knew they had a potential top 3 pick in this upcoming draft. Now we know that's a surety. They will pick basically at the number 3 spot behind the Celtics and the Lakers, who are picking at 1 and 2. So look, they're a dark horse in this. They need a savvy, veteran, experienced all-star player to sort of guide Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, who has not played yet, but we all know and sort of expect to be a great point guard for the 76ers. And even Sarge, who I picked as the Rookie of the Year in my mind. These are guys that you can see it coming. You can see this team really getting somewhere. But other than that pick, I'm not sure what the 76ers are going to be willing to trade or willing to compensate the Pacers for Paul George beyond that trade. The team that has the most assets, in my estimation, is still the Boston Celtics. And Danny Ainge with the idea that, hey, I get Paul George or I get Markelle Fultz or Lonzo Ball with the number 1 pick. He's in a win-win situation no matter what happens. It's just an idea of what does Kevin Pritchard want. How much could he demand? If I was Kevin, I'd ask for the moon and back. I'd ask for the stars. I'd ask for the galaxy. I'd ask for the solar system. I'd ask for everything if you're really trying to get a rebuild started and using Paul George as that asset, that big chip that you put on the table and say, look, if we're going to do this, if Paul's not committed towards anything beyond next season, and if Paul says, look, I want to play on a winner and I don't see it really happening here, then I'm more inclined, if I'm Kevin Pritchard or if I'm the Pacers front office, to make the first call to the Boston Celtics because they have Jay Crowder, they have Avery Bradley, they have serviceable guys. You can get the number 1 pick. I'd ask for, quite honestly, a lot of things and just see what Danny Ainge is willing to give up. If you're the Lakers, look, Magic Johnson has to be thrilled right now because you know he's good friends with Paul George. You know he's going to use the Kobe Bryant chip, the fact that Kobe Bryant's old agent is now the general manager with under him in the front office in Rob Pelinka. They're going to use all that to their advantage. Obviously, Paul George is from L.A., or from the Los Angeles area, I should say, played basketball at Fresno State, adores and loves Kobe Bryant, the legend of Kobe Bryant, the fact that he won 5 titles in Los Angeles. And look, Paul wants to be a star. He's built his brand with 2K, with Gatorade, and the such. So it's going to be an interesting decision as to see what the Lakers will try to offer, if they're just going to go with Ball at the number 2 spot and sort of try to convince Paul to, hey, play the end of your contract out, and maybe we can get you as a free agent in 2018. That's an option too. There's so many dominoes that we could go over, and I just think the 3 teams that ended up getting the top 3 picks in this lottery and in the draft on June 22nd, those are the 3 teams who have the best chance to convince the Lakers to give Paul George up begrudgingly. Now, I will say this. At every moment, even though Paul George sort of said, I don't want to talk about my future after the Pacers were swept, he has said to me countless times throughout the season, he loves Indy, he loves the fans, he wants to grow up and be considered one of the best players in franchise history, someone you could put next to Reggie Miller. He said all those things to me at the beginning of the season. And he did, and I will say this, he was impressed with the moves to bring in Jeff Teague and Thaddeus Young. He likes those players. Obviously, he really wants to develop Miles Turner and see where that ends up. But, there's only so much time left in a guy's prime, and pretty much Paul George is in it. And we don't know how long it will be sustained. Not many players are like LeBron James who just get better in year 14. So Paul is going to reach his apex at some point sooner in the future than I think, 4 or 5 years from now. And he wants to win, and these are the decisions that you're going to have to really try to get under control or get a better estimation of. I know Corey asked this just a moment ago, if George doesn't make the All-NBA team, would it matter if he made it next year? And that's Kevin Pritchard's dark card, that sort of joker in his hand is, hey, look, if he doesn't make All-NBA on Thursday and you can't offer him the Supermax and you're unwilling to trade Paul George and you want to convince him with one more year on his deal, hey, you signed this contract, so honor it, please. That could be sort of the mood or at least the play that Kevin Pritchard says, hey, look, I'm going to deny all trade talks and we're going to have 1 year. And look, it's an interesting scenario if that happens. If Kevin Pritchard is unwilling to trade Paul George and he doesn't make the All-NBA this year, now you're going to, hey, we're all in for 1 year. I mean, you could basically put that on Bankers Life Fieldhouse in 50-foot font. The idea that, this is the year and we got to do something, successful now. We got to win 8 playoff series. We got to win maybe 2 playoff series and meet LeBron James in the conference finals and maybe even push him to a Game 7. Look, the Pacers have only made the NBA Finals once in their NBA, or since the merger from the NBA. And so Paul George understands that history. He understands that Nate McMillan is relatively a new coach with a new roster. And look, how fast can Miles Turner develop in year 3? These are all the things you sort of have to think about in terms of if you want to get in and really push all your chips into, hey, we're going to let the draft go by. We're going to try to pick the best player at 18. We're going to try to pick the best player at 47. And then we're going to try to get Gordon Hayward or someone of that ilk or that caliber of player in the offseason, in free agency. And then we're just going to, okay, here we go. We got to win more than 42 games, and we got to have a higher seed than 7, and we got to have a better performance in the playoffs. Would this still be allowed to offer us the full max next year is what Corey asked as well. And yes, if Paul George doesn't make the Supermax this year, doesn't make All-NBA, which he is not eligible for the Supermax this year, then you can go through the last year of his contract. If he plays better, which is possible, I mean, he's gotten better every year. Let's remember that, folks. I mean, he played out of his mind in the postseason against the Cavaliers, really made those games closer than what they probably could have been had he not been playing at his best basketball when you needed it the most. Then yeah, he could go next season, have a career year, play upwards to 70 to 75, even 80 some odd games, have better statistics than he did last year, have the team perform better than last year, and all of a sudden now he could be voted on second or third All-NBA, and then the Pacers could offer him the Supermax next year. Now that's waiting out things for 12 months, and people get a little bit, anxious and a little bit eager to see something. And I think Paul's in that boat right now. He needs to see something in free agency as to whether the Pacers really are going to make a splash or if it's going to be much of the same where you're trying to take older veterans who maybe could help, like a Monte Ellis, like a Al Jefferson, maybe a Thaddeus Young, who you trade for. If you get those kind of caliber players, I'm not sure Paul George is going to be convinced to want to resign to a long-term deal, whether he makes All-NBA or not next season. The thing with, and I know it's interesting, Eric Vasquez asked this on Facebook Live, that sort of scenario, waiting it out an extra year or towards the final year with, say, Kevin Durant, that sort of backfired on them. And to a degree, yes. And to a degree, no, because they had Russell Westbrook, one of the 10 best players in the league, too. So at least they had something to fall back on. And once Kevin Durant left for Golden State, they had, wisely shifted their attention to, hey, here's a ton of money, Russell Westbrook, here's a franchise, you're going to lead us, and we expect you to have a great season. And, of course, we all know he had an historic season where he averaged a triple-double. And is one of the leading, vote getters in the MVP. Of course, we won't know who wins those awards until after the NBA Finals. because the NBA, for whatever reason this year, is doing an award show that is similar to the ESPYs. I digress, but at the same point, at least, the Pacers, if they trade Paul George, or if he walks in free agency next year, or if he doesn't make All-NBA, whether Thursday or next season, the best option you have is to build around Miles Turner. And look, in this era where guards and wings and perimeter players dominate the wins and losses in this league, it'll be interesting to see if someone of, Miles's caliber and play, and look, he's far beyond most young players who are 21 who have 2 years of experience in this league. But it'll be interesting to see, can a player who is a center, a shot blocker, a stretch five, to be fair, can he guide a team to great success, further on in his career? Obviously, you won't expect him to do that next season, whether Paul's there or not. He's going to play his role and he should get better. And I think Miles Turner is going to be an all-star at this point. But how far can his potential go? Who knows? There's a lot of scenarios, and that's why we're having this sort of discussion. Again, I appreciate all the questions from people on Facebook Live. I know there's a sense that tonight was one of the more pivotal big nights in franchise history for the Pacers, even though they weren't in the lottery. Now we know the Boston Celtics have pretty much all the assets necessary to make a trade happen. All it comes down to is if Kevin Pritchard is willing to do it, and if Kevin Pritchard is told by either Paul George or his agent that they don't see their future in Indy beyond either this year or beyond next year, or they don't see a clear path that leads to great success, given that every time Paul George has met LeBron James in the playoffs, it has not ended well for him. The Lakers, I think, are more willing to sort of draft Lonzo Ball, who is an exceptional player, and I know they drafted D'Angelo Russell a couple years ago as their maybe franchise point guard, but man, Lonzo's good. His father is hell-bent on getting his son to play for the Lakers and to stay in the Southern California area. And look, outside of that number one pick, or that first round pick, I should say, I'm not sure what the Lakers, can offer beyond, hey, we have the number 2 pick. Can we get Paul George for that? I'm not sure that's adequate or that's fair or that's good enough compensation for Kevin Pritchard and the Pacers. With Larry Bird stepping down, I do want to make this point. With Larry Bird stepping down, this means that it's possible, more so than ever, that Paul George could be traded. At no point last year did Larry Bird want to trade Paul George. Larry Bird is on record telling me and anyone who would listen that he wants to give Paul George the max player, that he believes in Paul George the most of anyone in that franchise. And look, everyone loves Paul George in Makers Life Fieldhouse, but Larry drafted him, developed him, watched him go through that gruesome leg injury in 2014, and basically said on record, he's going to be great and he's going to be even better when he comes back. And Paul fulfilled, Larry's vision. And when Larry, at the age of 60, stepping down, it's no longer his decision. And so Kevin Pritchard can make that now. And there's a growing sense that Kevin Pritchard is going to weigh all options to make this team successful, not in next year, but in the long term. So this is why this draft lottery was so important, because teams like the 76ers, the Lakers, and the Celtics are interested in Paul George, would love to have him on his team, and now they may have the chips or the assets to acquire him. Again, I am Nate Taylor, your IndyStar Pacers insider. We will follow this, basically all season long, or all summer long, I should say. The draft is June 22nd. I want to make that clear as well. The Pacers will have several draft workouts leading up to that. I'll provide coverage of that as well. And look, a trade could happen on draft night. A trade might not happen. And if that doesn't happen, then we will shift our attention to free agency, and whether Paul George will even be in meetings to try to convince other talented players to join him in Indy, or if he will just sort of sit back and see what Kevin Pritchard can do. But again, I appreciate everyone stopping by on Facebook Live. I got to kind of revise my story on the website right now that we know the Celtics have the number 1 pick. What does that mean? All the context. Some of the same things we discussed here. But this is our first trial run with this. And look, I appreciate everyone visiting, and we're going to provide more. And look, if Paul George traded, I'll be back on video sort of explaining why and what it means moving forward. And if he's not, we can change and shift our attention to the 2017-18 season. And if the Pacers can really decide or even play well enough to convince Paul to stay on a long-term deal. Thursday is the next big domino, as I mentioned earlier. That's when you're going to find out if Paul makes All-NBA or not. So this is Nate Taylor, your Pacers Insider. We'll provide all these updates as they come along. And thank you for joining us on Facebook Live.